podcast from TrueFire. We have a really special one today for you. It's my buddy, my good friend, someone we've worked with for many years now, guitar virtuoso. I do not use that term lightly, and master educator, Haque. Let's see, what can I tell you about Fareed that maybe you don't know already? Professor of jazz and classical guitar studies at Northern Illinois University for many, many years. Dozens of his own records with his various groups, hundreds as a sideman on dates with other artists. You might have seen him at, he's been a million jam and jazz festivals, toured extensively with his own jam supergroup, Garage Mahal, for 10 or so years. They did, I think, over 2,000 dates and 3 albums. He's worked with Sting, Dizzy Gillespie, Dave Holland, Joe Henderson, Joe Zawinul, Ramsey Lewis, Nigel Kennedy, Bob James, David Sanborn. He's played with many symphony orchestras. Currently touring with Billy Cobham. We'll find out more about that. But I got to read you a couple of cool quotes. From Guitar Player Magazine, the Reader's Choice Awards, Best World Guitarist. I love this one, also from Guitar Player Magazine. Classical and jazz, East and West, the future and the past, the brain and the booty all come together in glorious harmony via his fleet fingers and free-willing spirit. A finely honed classical technique and deep well of experience in pop music makes Haque a singular figure in music. That's from the Chicago Tribune. So let's interrupt him, see if we can engage him in some conversation. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm good.
That
I
was
can play
fun.
on that track all day.
I know. You can. Welcome back to TrueFire.
It's good to be here.
How long have we been working together now?
God,
I tried to think of the first date, but
10 years?
About 10 years.
Yeah.
So what's I think really special about your library here is it spans a lot of different styles, right? And we've covered we're doing a classical course,
Right.
the first classical course, but we've done bossa nova, we've done bebop, we've done modal,
Raga.
we've done raga, gaga for raga.
Right?
Tell everyone really quickly what we did with that course, because nobody on the planet has ever even touched a topic like that. What did we do there? What did you cook up for us?
Well, I have, I'm half Hindustani, my dad's side, and half Hispanic on my mom's side, and I've always loved both kinds of music, country and Western, in addition to Latin American music and Indian music and the connection there. And so I've always had these Indian bands and hung out with a lot of Indian musicians, and one of my favorite sitar players in the world is the great Indrajit Banerjee. And what's interesting about him in particular is whereas many Indian musicians have all kinds of stuff, he's got this bluesy thing, which is just part of his thing. And I would start copying his licks, and wow, I can play this on the guitar. So I brought Indrajit in. He sat cross-legged, He
did.
and played licks on the sitar, and then I kind of demonstrated how we could play them on the electric guitar, particularly with nice thin strings where you can bend. And kind of got some of the basics out there. A lot of folks want to get into the Indian thing, but without any background, and this gave everybody a little bit of the authentic,
and what
real deal.
a sweet, wonderful human being he was, wasn't he? Like
He is.
Just incredible.
And his egg curry is out of this world.
Yeah. So we took he showed us ragas. I remember from that course, there are different notes going up then coming down. So a variety of ragas and what the ragas were all about in terms of kind of feeling and spirit. And you showed us how to play that on guitar. Then you showed us how to emulate a lot of the expressions and embellishments on a sitar,
Kind
on
of
the
the
guitar.
authentic, from the authentic way,
But this wasn't just about learning more about, sitar and Indian music, but you showed us how to incorporate that vibe into your jazz improvisations.
Exactly.
So it was really a very useful course, you know. I mean, Derek Trucks, the great slide guitar player, got into the Indian thing for quite a long
I
time.
think he even might have gotten one of the courses, actually.
I think he did. So we did that, and what while we did the minor jazz comping survival guide this trip, and the classical course, and we will definitely talk about that and show that up. But since this is the first time we've really had this kind of a forum, I and you were agreeable to having us kind of pick out from your whole library some of the different things that we've done together.
Yeah,
you ready
definitely.
to dig into some of that?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to throw this stuff out at you, and let's see how you do. Okay? Let's see if you even remember the keys these things were in. How about the Soul Jazz Survival Guide?
Man, see, I mean, all that stuff is cool. I'm Hindustani and Chilean, but at the end of the day, the older I get, the more I realize how much Chicago and soul jazz and the blues is in my playing. And I realized that was a big part of what people, I think, were hearing was sort of this old school thing. And in fact, a lot of it is a lot simpler than people think. So, the essentials of soul jazz and of just jazz in general are basically built off the blues scale. Knowing how to use the blues scale, not necessarily in a rock and roll way or a fusion-y way, but actually as a vehicle for jazz and for bebop. And that's kind of what that starts you out with. It's sort of, I think, the most essential course that nails where Grant Green is coming from, a Midwestern sound, West Montgomery and all those sounds we dig.
And it's one of your most popular courses where maybe not everyone's going to pick up Gaga for Raga.
Right.
Okay. This one went #1 on the charts right out of the box. How about Lab Rat? Remember that kind of jam? You want to play over that a little bit?
Yeah.
Tommy, can you roll that? There you go, man.
That is fun.
Nice.
And almost all that comes out of the blues scale.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing is a lot of folks think the blues scale is is sort of a limiting scale when it actually is an open door scale. You can play, but then start to fill in. Then the major blues scale, right over the same chord. So C minor with a minor blues scale, with a major blues scale, and all of a sudden you have, and.
Nice. All of your courses, I remember you're very, well, you're a great teacher. And you identify kind of the objective of a curriculum, right? And listen, there's great playing on all of his courses, without a doubt. But I think what students love best about your courses is the way you deliver kind of key insight. You have, Farid's principles, very golden nuggets of ways to approach soul jazz in this case, or bebop or modal playing. And
one of the things that I think is crucial here is that I went through that scholarly. I had the guitar scholarship at North Texas State University, guitar lessons from day one. At the same time, I was going to jam sessions on the south side of Chicago. 16 in my dad's Chrysler New Yorker, driving to the south side by myself.
Right.
I was crazy, but happy. And what I began to see is that there was what people say you do, and then there's what was actually happening. And people say, oh, modes and arpeggios and avant-garde and like, tomes of theory. And then there was the actual cats playing all that hard music with the blues scale.
Right.
They were playing all those crazy chords with just a couple of notes.
Right.
And I said, well, it's a disconnect. And I started to tell my students, well, this is what it says in the book, but this is what actually happens. And it was like a revelation for all of us, because it opened a door to a kind of honesty about music that sometimes, teachers, they want to remain the teacher.
Right.
I think the best thing a teacher can do sometimes to a student's question is say, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
And that opens the door to working together, and I think that's a healthy process.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think until we started working with you, you were and still are. I think you still do some work at the university.
Yeah.
But you're touring and recording a lot, so I know the demands of the road and the studio have kind of made that a little difficult for you. But the way you approach a curriculum there at the university, as well as in your TrueFire courses, is not what you would expect a professor,
Right.
to do. You just make it very, very accessible. So that course, Soul Jazz Survival Guide, anybody that digs playing the blues and wants to jazz up their blues a little bit, that's the way to go.
Yep.
Let's jump into the world of jazz rock.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
So we did the Jazz Rock Workshop, another course. We talk a little bit about what that's about.
It's an extension of the Soul Jazz Survival Guide. In a way, we're starting to talk about, we've built up this catalog that once you can kind of play the blues scale in a jazz tune, then there's a main, simple idea, which is building a pentatonic off of the root or the fifth of the ninth of the key, which is a key signature sound that Chick Corea, John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, John Scofield, so many of the great fusion guitar players use. And it's a signature sound. You hear it, Jan Hammer, Jeff Beck, you hear it right away. And it's basically taking everything you learned in soul jazz, multiplying it by 3.
So you said the root, the
fifth,
and the ninth.
and the ninth.
Let's roll a track.
Yeah,
Let's hear that in action.
sure. I'll start with the root, then the fifth, then the ninth.
Cool.
We'll hear it.
you know, Tommy has to fade down these tracks because Fareed really could play all day long on that track. He really could. We've seen him do it. Okay, so that's jazz rock.
That is jazz rock.
Yeah,
There is jazz rock. That's jazz rock.
that's jazz rock.
That groove is jazz rock.
Yeah, very nice.
It's jazzy, then there's rock in there.
Okay, you ready to? Well, first of all, I want to tell you who, we asked folks to chime in, let us know where they're from. We're going to have some questions for you.
Sure.
So, right now, we've got folks from Russia, Indiana, Canada, Norway, Iowa, Austria, Belgrade, Serbia, Vienna, the Netherlands, Beirut, Lebanon, Iceland, London, San Francisco, Germany, France, California, Montana, New Hampshire, and Brazil. If you haven't chimed in yet, please do so, and we'll say hey to you as
that's
well.
crazy.
Isn't that amazing, man?
That is amazing.
It amazes me every time we do one of these.
I was going to
you know?
play like a national anthem,
Yeah.
and I said, whoa.
Yeah,
There's too many
so
countries.
it's like, that quote about you, best world guitarist. I mean, all music is like world music, isn't it?
I think so.
And
I think so.
What a brotherhood or community. It's just a wonderful thing, And when you think about, which we trip out on every time we do one of these are folks in different time zones, not just in different continents, They're, some are having breakfast, some are having dinner. For some of these folks, it's the middle of the night, right?
I appreciate that, man.
Tuned in to hear you do your thing
That's
and
very cool.
not to hear me talk. So let's jump over. We'll do a few questions after this next one. How about, you want to play Cherokee?
Yeah.
So this is from the Jazz Comping Survival Guide.
One of the, I think, I think where we launched with all this
Yeah.
was this idea of what actually happens on the gig. When I was a kid, I learned, I was so excited. I remember actually the Ronnie Lee guitar style, and I learned these chords, and I was like, wow. And then,
Right.
and I got on the gig and I went, and everybody was like, don't do that. And then I ended up getting my chords getting smaller and smaller until there was just that's all I had left. And as I began to teach this, I said, why learn big chords and then unlearn everything? Why not start from the little, start from the middle, the essential, and build your chords? And I had some students, when I started this process, who went from beginner to going to jam sessions and comping and actually getting gigs in 3 months. It was huge. It took me, maybe 3 years to take all the stuff that I learned and then unlearn it and relearn it. So I figure, why the negative reinforcement? And
So share that like one of your core concepts in, the minor comping guide we did here, and in this original one is building chords from the inside out. Would you just give a little quick tutorial on that?
So, essentially the guitar is already kind of divided into these nice zones. The essential notes in a chord, and it's not just theory, this is actually practice. This is what you'll hear Wes doing. You'll hear Joe Pass doing this. You hear Grant Green and Kenny Burrell especially, Barney Kessel doing this, where they'll just play the essential middle two notes, the third and the seventh. We call those the guide tones. So let's say I'm playing a blues. That's all you need. It's not all you need, it's all you even want. You can hear the progression.
Yeah.
If I start to solo,
Tommy, can you get that transcribed, please?
so
So you have the guide tones.
and that gives you the essence. Now, you want to get in there with the soloist a little bit, you add one extension. You start slowing the tempo down where you have a little more time to sustain the notes. You might add 2 extensions. But the key is you're still thinking about these guide tones as your home base. Now, let's say you don't want to get in there with the piano player, but the bass player breaks a string or, needs to go to the restroom. Well, then you just Keep those guide tones and add those bass notes. And all of a sudden you've got your perfect voicings for traditional old school jazz style, Freddie Green style, gypsy jazz, manouche jazz, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, you're always coming back to these guide tones. So you haven't really learned 15 different voicings. You've learned one set of principles that you can then use as you need them.
Yeah.
It's very flexible and very practical.
Students flipped over that concept because especially those, already playing jazz or learning jazz, they were intimidated by all these big voicings and all the chords they had to know. And you boiled it down to that. And you're right. That's all you really need at the end of the day.
Right.
And that's why, just like you said, your students at the university level, we had a lot of students here say, I got them up and running already without having to learn a whole chord dictionary. Okay.
And that whole chord dictionary, I'm not even sure, what it's actually useful for in the practical world. That all those big chords, in some cases, are really more academic. Till you get to sitting by yourself playing solo guitar, sure. But in terms of ensemble, the first thing you want to do is be able to leave room for the other musicians and react to them, and that's what this approach allows you to do.
Very cool. How about we roll? I think you have the changes to Cherokee on that course. Jazz Comping Survival Guide. Feel free to do your thing over that. Okay, Tommy.
I'll comp first.
Okay, cool.
2 notes.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And you could do that all day too, right?
That's a good song.
I remember, want to do some questions?
Sure.
Okay, because let's see. This is from Christian. Fareed, I own most of your courses, love them. In the meantime, I'm doing well on jazz ballads and mid-tempo songs, but I struggle with the up-tempo material.
Me too.
Do you have some tips on this?
Well, I do, but the real answer is it is hard. It's hard to play straight-ahead jazz at up tempos on the guitar. You listen to all the greatest guitar players, and you hear everybody struggle with that. And I think the reason is because it's one thing to play fast, it's another thing to play fast and swing. That's another thing to play fast and swing and play something that actually makes some musical sense. And that can be quite a challenge. The short answer is work on your time, work on your rhythm, and play what you hear and what swings. It's really easy. And let me back that up by saying one of the reasons that the Soul Jazz Survival Guide is so essential is because when you get to fast tempos on any instrument, let alone the guitar, you're not really outlining all the changes. You're hitting the big moments. So if I play it on Cherokee, I can really play almost all of Cherokee, especially the A sections, just using the blues scale. So almost all that is just the blues scale. And if you can get around the blues scale and play nice lines that swing, you don't really need to play, which is what we kind of get into, this ricky-ticky-ticky play every note that outlines every chord. And that's not really what's happening. If you really, one of my greatest moments as a teacher is when my student comes in and says, I love Grant Green. I said, well, let's transcribe some Grant Green. They come back the next week with this sad face. I transcribed Grant Green, and it's really simple. And I'm like, and then after a couple of months of working on it, they go, Grant Green is really simple. Like there's a genius there in knowing how to use those same few notes and make them swing.
So if you would, explain how you would use the blues scale over the changes to Cherokee. If you go chord by chord, which blues scale?
So if I was playing the Cherokee's here in B flat, right? And the key of the blues scale is not the notes that it has, it's the notes that it historically and purposely leaves out. So it basically hits all of the sweet common tones. And if you just connect those with some chromatics, just physically connect them, you're going to start making some nice lines. So if you have the changes, that's the whole A section. Now you play that a little faster.
So are you changing the blues scale you're using?
No.
What blues scale are you using?
Just the B flat major blues scale.
Over all those changes.
Over all those changes.
There you go.
Now the only thing that happens is when you want to get bluesy, you play the minor blues scale, which I think we all kind of who play the blues kind of have that wired into us. So when you get to some of these weird chords, 90% of the time, it's the minor blues scale. So if I'm going, major blues scale, major blues scale. You could hear that going back home. That was the minor blues scale, which kind of outlines this F7 altered sound. You don't need to know that, though, because most of the great cats didn't know that. They just heard major blues. Coming up in the gospel, experience coming up on the other side of the tracks. You know, people didn't necessarily have access to a great formal education, and that was a blessing because they came out of the blues, they came out of R&B, and all those principles, you know, fall right into place in jazz.
And you know, that's, you know, the feedback we get to your courses. You'll get to read the chat. There's a ton of your students on here raving about the comping, the soloing. The other thing that rises to the top of the feedback always is how, you know, most of us do know our minor blues, you know, the minor pentatonic, the major pentatonic, the blues scale. And, you know, and most of us kept thinking we had to learn 100 scales and 100, you know, and you relate your pentatonics show up in all of your courses. Soul jazz, bebop, the modal thing. You give us that as a reference point, which already gets us in the game. And that's what, you know, that's what I love. That's what other students of your courses love.
And getting back to...
I mean, that was an amazing demonstration you just did. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
but I mean, it was really ear and eye opening. And it's the material you cover in these courses.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, and I think one of the things that happens is a lot of musicians, because they feel like there's this sound that they can't get, and so they start looking into books with arpeggios, with complicated scales. The truth is, the sound they're looking for is not in the notes. The sound they're looking for is in the rhythm, right? If you listen to the great players, and more importantly, you know, I had the blessing to be able to play in rhythm sections with great musicians, and it's very much almost like a folklorical tradition. You learn that my note is supposed to go there in relation to that bass note, that drum note, that piano chord. There's a place they sit, and that creates a swing, and it's not all by your lonesome. It's a collective thing, you know. So when you play that blues scale, if I play... There's one feel that goes along with that. If I play, you know, right?
Yeah.
I can, maybe not in that key, but, you know, the same pentatonic scale can kind of end up being sort of country, right? You know? All of a sudden you change the feel. All of a sudden it's jazz.
Yeah.
So rather than spending so much time working on all that crazy theory and stuff, take that blues scale, learn how to swing, and you're going to be 70% there.
Cool. Couple more questions?
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, Sammy says, Fareed's courses have been amazing in simplifying theory into accessible approaches. So I just wanted to slip that in because that amplifies what it is that you're saying.
That's nice to hear.
Okay, quick answer to this from Lee. Maybe it's me, but your playing sounds like you've been heavily influenced by Grant Green. Is that the case?
Hey, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I would say that my first influence was John McLaughlin and Pat Martino. And the more I got to playing funk, the more George and Grant became a big part of what I do. It was always in there, I think, but I didn't play in that many groove funk contexts until Garage Mahal. I was talking to Kai, the bass player in Garage Mahal. We had a couple of gigs that last weekend in Colorado. I was like, dude, I played 11 years, 200 dates a year, 10 guitar solos a night. Over a one-chord vamp. You know, you start getting comfortable with the one-chord vamp.
Right.
And Grant was the king of that.
Yeah.
You know, so absolutely, it's a great compliment, and I
Definitely
thank
one
you.
of your influences with that. I mean, you've been influenced by a lot of music, you know, across wide genres of music. Another question. Let's see, from Jazz, etc. Fareed, could you maybe talk about how to develop, and you were doing this just a little bit ago, how to develop a great swing feel for single note soloing in jazz? How do you go about developing that?
It's an ongoing process. I mean, I still listen to everything I play, less about whether it's clean or sloppy and more about whether it swings.
What is swing? We love to ask this question. We ask two like really ethereal questions. What is swing? What is groove?
Right.
What is swing? For
You know, I like to say that for me, and I'll make this personal, swing is a very traditional, rhythmic approach to American music. It's very specific. There's a lot of people who are like, well, jazz is universal. I'm like, well, improvisation is universal. Jazz is American. That doesn't mean there isn't Latin jazz,
Right.
or Afro-Caribbean jazz, or fusion jazz, or Indian jazz, or Irish jazz, but when you come back to the tradition of jazz, you can say very clearly, these are the roots. And in those roots, you listen to some of these great records from back in the day, and there's something going on there. There's a shuffled note, right? Bing, bing, ba-bing, ding, ka. And that shuffled note isn't really a 16th. It really isn't a triplet. It isn't daka-da-daka-dee, daka-dee, daka-dee. That's the death of swing. When people start playing swing as if it's in 12/8, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you kind of kill it. When you make it 16ths, bop-dee, bop-bop, bop-bop, and that's all of a sudden a samba. It's in between. It's that 3 against kind of 4 thing. And we can talk about it in intellectual terms, but it's a feeling thing. You got to be able to listen to the drums, listen to the rhythm section, and place your notes initially a little behind the beat. And that starts to develop the feeling of what swinging is. So instead of, I might play, right? And right away, if you can hear my foot on the mic there, I'm not sure, but
we can.
that sounds a little square right away. But if I play, so I would say the first and most basic thing is beginning to understand how to lay back. It is an oral tradition. The best thing you can do is listen and copy, not the notes, copy the feel. Take that Grant Green solo or that Cannonball Adderley solo or that Dexter Gordon solo and listen, grab just a couple of phrases and listen to the drummer in relation to Dexter, and then play your notes against the drummer the way. And I would definitely sit with a record when I was, and still do this, and try to play the notes until they made me feel the way Dexter made me feel when I heard it.
Yeah.
If it had that little splank in it.
Yeah.
And I would just keep, and it isn't math. It's language. If I was to tell you, something with a particular articulation, hey man, sounds great. What is that, sarcastic? There's communication there that's beyond the words.
Right.
Am I sincere? And, jazz is this kind of language. There's humor in jazz, That makes me laugh. That's funny. Right? Not, but, right? That's funny.
Right.
When I'd hear Sonny Rollins play, I would burst out laughing. And I wanted to have that in my music as much as I could, and so spent a lot of time really digging into just a few phrases, listen to the rhythm section, place your notes against the band and see how it makes you feel. The longs, the shorts, where it's attacked, where it's not attacked, all those little subtle things is where the swing lies.
Very cool answer, man. Very cool.
One more thing is important. Sorry.
Go.
So sorry. The most important thing I missed here, swing is always in 4. It's not in 2. It's always in 4. Swing is a march music. And if you look at all of the musics that become influenced with jazz, they're also in 4/4 time. Tango became influenced with jazz. Many styles, bossa nova became influenced with jazz, always in 4, because jazz is a march. Starting in New Orleans as a march, right? A happy march. It's not 1, 2, 1, 2. That's the mistake a lot of musicians make. The important beats are 2 and 4, but there is no accent on 2 and 4. Really, we can get into some little differences here, but essentially the pulse is in 4. It's always driving. That's why you have the bass drum on 4, the walking bass on 4, the acoustic guitar on 4. Everybody going junk, 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 junk. It's just pretty boneheaded, baby. It's not that subtle.
Yeah.
And then everybody else is going, I'm just trying to hang on to the march. So behind, but the march is going boom.
Very cool.
Low, low, low. Keeps going.
Good point, man. Good addendum to that rap.
Sorry, that was an important one I wanted to get in.
Then let's jump into, remember, Bebop Improv Survival Guide, and you really broke out Blue Bossa for us. So we were just talking about the Bossa Nova.
Yeah.
Let's roll the track and do something over the track, and then talk about how you approached it. From a bebop perspective.
And this is definitely not the pentatonic approach on purpose.
Okay. Tommy, Blue Bossa. Oh, I'm sorry. Were
No,
you
no, yeah. So
You wanna
basically,
talk first, and then we'll roll the track.
I'm playing all the arpeggios to the chords, because really the pentatonic is your meat and potatoes, but then you want some spices, and the spices is this arpeggios and stuff. Most people think it's all spices, and that's where they get stuck, because they keep trying to add more pepper. There's nothing in there; it's just burning the pot, right? You got to put that meat and potatoes in, and then bring in a little arpeggio to add some color, some spice. And this will be all arpeggios. So you'll really hear the chord progression. I can even demonstrate it without the track, and you'll hear all the chords. But let's play the track.
Okay, play the track and then do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Tommy? Now do it, no backing track.
Yeah, so if you really hear the harmony and begin to make lines built off arpeggios, you can, at a reasonable tempo, outline all the chords. All the harmony. Ideally, to really say, I know a tune, you've taken your time, you've played it using the pentatonic scale, you've added all of this spice on top of it, and you begin to find ways to sort of move between just hearing the bluesy, rootsy version and all of the harmony.
Nice.
And then find a balance between those two things. That's typically what you hear most players doing.
Awesome. So you remember we also did right after that one we did the Modal survival guide, and everybody, certainly myself included, loved when you took Voyage, I think was the track, Maiden Voyage kind of a vibe, and you showed us how to play it bebop style and then how you might solo over it modal style.
Yeah.
Would you do that demonstration for
Sure,
us and then
sure.
afterwards kind of talk about the
Yeah.
distinction?
Yeah.
Tommy? So bebop style first.
Right. Sure. So that's more the bebop style.
Bebop style. Now
Little modal.
do the modal thing, then explain it.
Sure. Tomas. So this modal concept is a huge issue because, and this is, this really messed me up for years. I had a student come in and he had learned all of his modes. First of all, I don't really know of any Greek toga playing musicians from, 1,000 years BC, but I don't even know if bebop was around. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But be that as it may, for some reason they decided to use these Greek names for modes of the major scale. And everybody had all of these modes to learn. And historically, one of the reasons that jazz musicians began using a modal concept was to get away from the bebop sound. Not that they didn't like the bebop sound, but that had been done. It was time for something new. They wanted to get away from the bebop sound, so they used this modal approach initially. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, so many fantastic musicians. I'll leave somebody out, so that's enough. And basically their idea was, let's not use all 12 notes, let's just stick to 7. And in the same way that an Indian raga has kind of a mood because it stays with one set of notes, a mode has a mood because it stays with one set of notes. But then someone had the bright idea of teaching bebop using modes. Well, modes were designed not to play bebop.
Right.
So I had a student come in, knew all his modes, and said, man, I said, wow, that sounds great. You know, you're going to play just like some of the great modal players, you know, Pat Metheny, you know, and I'm being very general. Everybody's a little of both, you know.
Yeah.
But Pat Metheny is a good example of a particularly modal player in his original seminal recordings. And John McLaughlin also be a very modal player. And and he looked at me, the student, said, I don't want to play like that. I want to play like Wes. I said, well, you can't play like Wes playing modes. You got to be playing the blues scale and arpeggios.
Yeah.
Because that's how they were playing.
Yeah.
And that was like a big bombshell to me because he had actually been my student for a year at this point. And I'm like, well, he played a white 175. He played all this modal stuff. He must really like Pat Metheny, you know. And he never said I didn't like Pat Metheny, but, you know. And I began to realize that a lot of us were stuck in this world where we were trying to play modern jazz using a bebop approach or playing, you know, bebop using a modern approach, and they're kind of divergent. They're kind of two different things. And so essentially a bebop approach is coming from the roots of the blues, building your lines using chromaticism around arpeggios. So if you see D sus, you would automatically think D7. And then the bebop lines that come from D7. All that's that sassy, bluesy stuff. I think a lot of musicians were tired of being sassy in 1962.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, enough sassy with the civil rights movement and all the history stuff that was going on. They're like, well, some serious notes. The serious notes were really mostly just the pure notes. So if you had D sus, you know, they were playing. Has a different kind of sound. There's no chromaticism. None of this. Right? There's.
Right.
Now I switch to the other scale of F sus. You know, and you might use chromaticism, but not in the same way that you would in bebop. You might use chromaticism just to connect notes as a gesture, as opposed to this. That's a very signature bebop sound. And so using those two approaches has always been real interesting. And you know, to be fair, you know, all of the great musicians at some point explore all of those sounds. You know, McCoy Tyner is probably one of the most quintessential pentatonic modal players, but in his early career and his late career, he was a stone cold Wynton Kelly bebopper, and he played all beautiful bebop. So, you know, both those things are part of our language, but it's important to clarify that they're different things that we different colors that we use.
Great demonstration, man. Questions? Ready?
Sure.
Oh, more people chiming in from Idaho, Chicago, Luxembourg, Florida, Puerto Rico, Denmark, Denver, Italy, Alberta, Poland, Ontario, San Pedro, and the Maldives.
The Maldives.
Maldives, sorry.
That's a really nice place, I
Say
think.
hello to all your fans from all these different places, man.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches, and
Crazy.
and salud. Ciao.
Okay.
That's so cool, man. I didn't realize this was going to go all over the
After
place.
Rock Radio asked, and I think this is a good idea, could we roll that Blue Bossa track again, which you played all arpeggios? And could you demonstrate how you would play the pentatonics, the blues scale over that? Could you do that? Tommy, can you roll Blue Bossa again, please? And by the way, Tommy, before you roll that, Zach posted a promo code in the chat here. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It's Fareed Live, all one word, Fareed Live. Good for 25% off of any of your courses.
Very
You know,
cool.
we're covering, you know, we've talked about almost every course in here. So take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And, you know,
That's like 10 courses, so that'd be like
I think it's 11 now.
11. Okay,
Yeah.
so that'd be like 3 for free.
There you go. I love it, man. Okay, let's roll Blue Bossa.
Okay.
Play it all with the blues scale. There you go. That was a great request. Thanks.
Now, what happens though is you notice that of course I have to kind of play a little less what I'm hearing just to stick. It's like only using verbs. It's a little tricky when you want to tell a story. But it works. It works, and you still have chromaticism. You just don't have chromaticism that's built around every specific chord. It's a more general chromaticism. It sounds good. It's within the changes. All I'm using is the C minor blues scale for the A sections and the B flat minor blues scale for the bridge, and then back to the C minor, and it all works. Key, you got to be tasty. Key, you have to hear what you're playing first. You can't ever just let your fingers do the walking. That's not the game.
Yeah.
Right? You got to train your ear to start hearing those sounds, where the common tones are. Be careful. One of the biggest mistakes I think most musicians make is they think they can let their fingers do the walking. B.B. King never, I don't think I've ever heard B.B. King play a wrong note on songs that had chord changes. And one of the greatest things that he did is when he didn't know what to play, he didn't play anything at all. Whew. That's a huge lesson.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Okay, let's talk about, man, first of all, there's so many great questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to them all. A lot of these questions you've answered in the various material you have, and I think if you send Farid an email, you go to his site. What's your site address?
www.farid.com.
Okay. And I'd encourage you to go there, check out all the recordings. He has been known to answer an email or two, but it's a great site, gives you a lot of information. I hardly covered his pedigree. I think you'd find it very interesting. But I wanted to save time in the broadcast to talk about the two chord. We're going to really change gears in a minute. And to get a gear rundown, the gear Farid uses, just crazy killer. So the companion to the first Jazz Comping Survival Guide, you came back this week and did the minor jazz.
Yeah, it was
comping
actually,
guide.
we had a lot of requests for that.
Yes, we did.
Because, we really covered comping on major keys and major blues, or, dominant 7 blues.
Yeah.
And we had kind of left for another day to get into minor keys, because it is a little more of a dense issue. And we just had so many requests because, I think the first comping survival guide was so popular that we finally decided
Very
to.
much so. So this really kind of completes the picture, I think. And you follow a lot of the same principles, building chords from the inside out, which I guarantee you will will open up a whole new world for you. Especially, I remember you telling me, I told you I was struggling just comping at up tempo,
Right.
meters and guide tones,
Yeah.
and then adding on the extensions or putting, adding the bass line. That really solved my problem, I'll tell you that.
That's cool. That's cool.
So let's just pull a track and do some minor comping examples. How about that kind of medium up-tempo one you did?
Yeah, that blues.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's important because almost all of the minor, like Sugar and Work Song and, Moanin', these are all more or less summertime. They're all more or less blues in a minor key. So this covers a lot of bases.
Cool. Tommy, can you roll that one? Beautiful. So again, great companion to the original. I mean, it's not just a companion; it's the rest of the picture,
Basically,
really.
yeah.
And all of Farid's principles are in there, and you gets you up and running very, very quickly. And it's essential. I mean, you got to have it, really.
And there are some fundamental special cases with minor keys that you need it to kind of deal with them separately because minor chords, you have more than one kind of minor scale, so you have more than one kind of minor set of voicings. You kind of have to negotiate that little bit of a jungle. Whereas major keys, it's a little more straight out there.
Yeah, and you cover a lot of the turnarounds as well in that chorus.
Yeah, that's
That
key.
was a great section too.
That's key.
Okay, ready to really shift gears on folks out there?
Sure.
So, Farid is classically trained. I mean, did you start on classical guitar?
Yeah.
And, we've talked about doing something in the classical arena for a long time. And we asked Farid to come in and see if he could nail a course with, a set's worth of classical tunes that are very approachable without having to spend, years studying. Okay. And so there are 10 tunes, and there are very approachable versions of these classical pieces with some variations. And again, a lot of Farid's principles of classical guitar, great insight and tips. So we're going to play one for you, and you'll get a feeling for where more of Farid's roots come from.
I'm going to pull an audible here and maybe play a little something with a little improvisation here.
Ah.
Because
You said something really interesting the other day, which was, that a lot of people, there's no improvisation in classical music. Could you just run that down one more time for folks?
yeah, I think what's crucial here is that, improvisation in classical music was not just something that like, some of the more virtuosic players did. Back in the Baroque back in Bach's day or Bach and Bach's day. Basically everybody read off of chord symbols. Mm-hmm. Just like today, we might learn off of just C, F, and G.
Right.
They had chord symbols. They were a little different. They were called figured bass, and it was a bass line with some little numbers that told you what chord it was. Or what notes to play on top of the bass line, right? And so normally a piece would just be written with 2 lines, the bass line and the melody, like this little Spagnoletta I'm going to play. And there would then be, expected that every time you repeat it, you might play it a little differently. If you were a virtuoso, then you might really play it, all kinds of stuff, There are little pieces by musicians from classic era, Mozart's time, where it might be a little piece, and then there might be with a little on top. And that usually meant, most of the piano teachers or guitar teachers say, well, here you have a fermata, that means just wait and then keep on going. But that's not what it usually meant. It usually meant, and then resume. So play a little improvised cadenza. And, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but you do have a moment there where you're supposed to kind of come up with your own idea. In a Baroque piece like this little Spagnoletta, which means, Spanish miniature, right? It's a very simple melody. But it's meant to have some rhythm and some filling out. Now it could go. And so you could really start to get further and further into this. And the key is, man, how many times have I played wedding gigs? I said, can you come and play? And I might, and back in the day it would be authentic. I might play a piece like this. You might play it 5 times in a row, every time a little differently. And it's beautiful because it's meant to be a vehicle for variations.
And you give us variations for all 10 of the pieces in there.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And give you just some of the basic stylistic, simple. For example, if you played a C chord in the Baroque style, that would be very common. This is fine. This would be more common. I mean, the guitar back in the 15th and 16th century was tiny. And it was known for, you carried it on your back, you pulled it out, and you sang love songs. Right? So that strumming style is a very big part of the guitar tradition, to this day and, back in the day. And so those connections are exciting to me because I realize, you know, how little has actually changed in 500 years.
Yeah. So what we loved about this course is, one, you enabling us to learn some of these pieces, but two, also if you can't nail a particular grip, leave a note out.
Absolutely.
You showed us how to kind of minimize some, some of the chords, some of the voicings. And
not
it gets us in the game, even though we're not fingerstyle players. Or we might be blues or rock players.
Right.
You can learn these things.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that these aren't simplifications, right? Many of the times, historically, guitarists were arranging piano players' versions of accompaniments when those original accompaniments were played on the guitar or the lute. I remember jamming with Stephen Stubbs, this wonderful guitarist and lutenist who's a specialist in early music.
Yeah.
We were playing some Vivaldi, and I had all these hard notes, and he was supposed to play the accompaniment, and he kept saying, hey, why don't we go get a beer? We can rehearse later.
Right.
I'd be like, oh, okay, and then, we should rehearse, Stephen. He said, well, no, we'll be fine, but let's go get lunch. How about we grab a little, an hour before the concert, he said, let me see that thing. And he ends up playing for a serious classical audience, and people were flipping out. And I was like, just hang on. Because I was expecting, all these thousands of notes when the real accompaniment, the real authentic thing was not that different from what you might play on a country gig or a bluegrass gig or something, Irish folk music gig. And it was really a revelation to me that how much we have in common, bossa nova, jazz, Irish folk music, bluegrass, classical music. It's all part of the same stream of culture. And it's exciting to me to let people know that you can choose how you arrange those pieces. If you have a little bit of understanding of the style, you can make some informed decisions and say, wow, that note is really awkward. It doesn't really do anything for the piece. Any sensible guitarist would just leave it out. John Williams leaves it out. I might as well. You might as well.
There you go. That's my favorite part of the course.
Right?
Okay, we've run over, but people are really digging it. So take us through your gear, if you would.
Oh, sure.
But keep that handy. You maybe can play us out with
I'd
a
love
classical piece. But tell us about your guitar and both guitars and kind of the gear that you will gig with or record with.
Well, I have a bunch of fine Spanish guitars. In the recording studio, I tend to lean towards Ramirez flamenco guitars. They're very consistent. I would say, for those of you who are interested, they're probably undervalued right now. They sound great for classical music, great for flamenco. They sound great amplified. This guitar is a very special instrument made in Cordoba by a good friend of the great Miguel Rodriguez, whose guitars now, since Miguel passed away, are going for anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000.
Wow.
And this is not a copy, but built by an informal disciple of Miguel Rodriguez, and has a similar rosette, similar architecture, bracing, and a very brilliant kind of sound. For gigging, Lion and Healy has this amazing new line of guitars that they've come out with. They sent me a few, and I've been using them in my duo with Goran Ivanovic. It's a beautiful instrument, no CITES wood. Right? This is important. None of the wood that you can't travel with. So it's a beautiful looking a white ebony, spruce or cedar top. Comes already built in with the Acus system, the undersaddle piezo, an internal mic, and their own preamp. And it just sounds marvelous. I have a new album out with guitar and strings. I use this thing, and it's been the answer to all of my issues with amplifying classical.
Nice.
I had a rehearsal with my fusion band. Didn't have time to go home and switch guitars. Showed up with my classical guitar, plugged it into a Fender Twin, cranked it up, no feedback. Played the whole rehearsal. And but with the Acus amp and their special preamp, it's just a marvelous sound. In terms of touring with Billy Cobham, I've been using, for all of my jazz gigs, I use the custom Gallup guitars, and I can maybe grab that and bring it over here. This is one of the prototypes that is so interesting because it's a design that I had thought about, and Brian Gallup at the same time was like, yeah, I've been thinking about that. So we kind of got our heads together. So this is a full 17-inch wooden bridge kind of arch top, but you see it's got no F-holes. And all of the models that prototypes have a slightly different size block under the bridge. And the back is flat. Beautiful wood, as you can see, but it's flat. The top is arched and carved. One of the reasons you get a lot of feedback from a traditional arch top is because the back and the top are both arched, and they create, more standing waves. I had some cheap old Craftsman. It didn't really sound great. It was like one of those Sears guitars you get in the pawn shop. I didn't know why, but it wouldn't feed back. And so I mentioned that to Brian. He's like, well, that's because of boom, boom, boom. So we reproduced it here, in a high-quality instrument. And you can hear that, it has a very, that's that old-school jazz sound.
Yeah.
But, baby, I can crank this up. And with Billy Cobham, Billy can hit those drums, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's cranking and not an ounce of feedback, like no feedback. So I've been really, really excited about this instrument. The final prototype is on its way, and it'll be slightly deeper. But if you think about it, a 17-inch, that's the real big size.
Oh, yeah.
Plays great, of course. All of that.
Looks
that stuff
great.
is fantastic.
Tell everyone what the inlays are all about.
Brian really wanted to personalize it, and I was a little self-conscious about having Farid. So this actually says Farid in Arabic. But so these guitars have really been the ticket for me. I've been traveling with the Hendrickson amplifiers, the Baby Bud.
Yeah.
I had a Garage Mahal gig, one of the first ones where I used the Baby Bud.
Yeah.
And everybody in the band were just freaking out because they all showed up with cabinets,
Right.
and the Baby Bud is about a little
How
bit
many
bigger
watts is that one?
I think it's 120.
Yeah.
It's plenty. Let me put it that way. And I just, we put a mic on it, send a line to the house, whatever seems to be the most convenient. Gets a great jazz tone. I have a little pedal that has an amp sim for distortion sound, so that works out real nice.
Cool.
And again, it literally fits in my suitcase,
That's great.
so I can show up with.
How much did those go for? Do you know?
I think the 2-channel one think is maybe $1,200 retail. Not crazy.
Yeah.
And I think they have a new one which is a single channel, which maybe it's called the Baby Blue. And I believe that's like $900.
Yeah, there a lot of folks are raving about those amps. They're phenomenal.
Especially as a touring rig.
Yeah.
For that jazz sound. You can't really beat it. Just because it's so compact that I can literally take it on the road with me.
Yeah, that's great.
And every night the sound man is like,
Right.
we know what it's going to sound like. I mean,
Right.
I love an old Fender.
Yeah.
But man, on the road, every other one is a disaster.
Right.
So it's
So you
can't-
don't have to rely on what the back line has. You've got it in your suitcase.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly. It's been working out nice.
So play us out with a nice classical piece.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. This was a great broadcast. We covered a lot of ground. Don't forget about Farid Live. Use that as a promo code for any of the courses that we talked about today. And Farid, thank you. I know you've got a little more work to do on the classical thing.
Yeah.
For carving out this time and doing this thing with us. It was great.
Well, I just got to say, thank you, Brad, and thank you, TrueFire, for opening this door, because it's a real honor for me to be able to share these ideas and frankly, just to get to know you guys. 'Cause
It's a blast working. We always have a lot of fun, don't we?
we do. We work hard, and it's good work.
We do work
man.
hard,
It's
but
good
look
work.
at what we've done over the past 10 years.
man.
It's a hell of a library, right?
Yeah, man.
What are you going to play?
Let me play a little bit of this Melodia Española.
Excellent.
you.